I had always prided myself on not being the kind of guy who jumped to conclusions. I wasn't paranoid by nature. But that night, as I reached into the dryer to pull out the load of laundry, I found something that changed everything. It was a men's shirt. It wasn't mine, of that I was certain. The size was all wrong, the brand unfamiliar, and the style was one I never would have picked for myself. At first, I tried to shake it off, thinking maybe it was a mistake. Perhaps it belonged to a friend who'd visited recently, or maybe even something I had borrowed and forgotten about. But deep down, something inside me knew it wasn't that simple. This shirt didn't belong in our laundry basket, and that realization sent a chill down my spine. I stood there, holding the shirt, my mind racing. The doubts began to creep in, thoughts I had buried before, thoughts I hadn't allowed myself to entertain. The late nights, the unexplained absences, the way Emma's phone was always buzzing with messages that she would quickly dismiss whenever I was around. But this shirt, it was the physical proof, a tangible reminder that something was happening right under my nose. I went to the living room, holding the shirt in my hands, my heart pounding in my chest. Emma was sitting on the couch, scrolling through her phone as usual, but when I walked in, she immediately glanced up. There was something in her eyes that I couldn't place, something that made my stomach twist with a mix of dread and suspicion. I stood there for a moment, trying to steady my breathing, before I spoke. "Emma, we need to talk," I said, trying to keep my voice steady. She looked up at me, her expression a mix of confusion and annoyance. "What about?" I held the shirt out in front of me, watching as her eyes flickered for just a second before she quickly masked her reaction. Where did this come from?" I asked. Her face flushed briefly, but she quickly recovered, setting her phone down on the coffee table with a sigh. "I don't know, maybe it's yours," she said, waving it off like it was no big deal. "You probably just forgot it was yours." I frowned, feeling the familiar tightness in my chest. I had known her long enough to recognize when she was deflecting, when she was trying to avoid a conversation. But this felt different. "It's not mine, Emma. I'm sure of that," I said, trying to keep the anger from bubbling up. "So, whose is it?" Her face went blank for a moment, and then she sighed again, her shoulders slumping. "I don't know, Mark. Maybe one of your friends dropped it off or something. It's just a shirt. Why are you making a big deal out of it?" I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I had spent years building a life with this woman, and now, standing in front of me, was someone who couldn't even acknowledge the simple fact that there was a man's shirt in our laundry, a shirt that didn't belong to me. The more she deflected, the more my suspicions grew. It wasn't just about the shirt. It was the way she was acting, the way she was trying to convince me that I was overreacting. "Emma, come on," I said, my voice quieter now, trying to make her understand. "This isn't just some mistake. This isn't just about a shirt. There's something else going on here, and you know it." She ******* me a look, the kind of look that told me she had already made up her mind about how she was going to handle this. "You're being paranoid, Mark. Honestly, it's exhausting." She shook her head, her eyes narrowing. "Maybe you should focus on the fact that I'm trying to be a good wife, instead of picking apart every little thing. You're acting like this is the end of the world when it's nothing." It was in that moment that I realized how she was handling this. She wasn't defending herself. She wasn't admitting anything. She was just managing the situation. She had already shifted the blame onto me. She was making me feel like the problem, like the fact that I was questioning her actions was the real issue. It wasn't the shirt or the obvious sign of infidelity. It was my suspicious behavior that needed to be addressed. I wanted to argue, to press her further, but something stopped me. A sense of resignation washed over me. I knew I wasn't going to get any real answers. She wasn't going to admit anything. I didn't even know if she could. "I'm not paranoid, Emma," I said, the words feeling hollow. "But this is a problem. You're making it about me, and that's not fair." She stared at me, her expression hardening. "If you want to believe something that isn't true, fine," she said, standing up. "But I'm done with this conversation. You're blowing this way out of proportion." And just like that, she turned and walked out of the room. I stood there, the weight of the moment settling in. She didn't even try to explain, didn't even try to defend herself. She simply shut me down, deflected, and walked away. I felt an overwhelming sense of confusion and disbelief. Was this really happening? Was this how she was handling this? Was this how she was going to protect herself from the truth? I stood there in the quiet of the room, holding the shirt in my hands, trying to make sense of it all. I could feel my stomach churning, my thoughts spiraling. But I also knew one thing for sure. I had seen the first sign of what was happening, and Emma's reaction had only confirmed it. The infidelity had already shown itself, but instead of facing it head-on, she was playing a game of deflection. She had already shifted the blame to me, made me feel like I was the one who was out of line. And in that moment, I knew that this was just the beginning of a long, painful road that I wasn't sure I was ready to walk down. But I had to. I had no choice. The truth was right there in front of me, and no matter how much Emma tried to deny it, I couldn't unsee it. I had to face the reality of what was happening, no matter how much I wished I didn't have to. The moment Emma walked away, I felt the weight of everything settle in. The confrontation hadn't gone as I'd expected, but it wasn't a surprise. It wasn't the first time I'd noticed things about her that felt off. But now it was as if the fog had lifted, revealing a truth I had been too blind to see before. The days that followed were a blur of confusion, mixed with brief moments of clarity. I kept thinking back to all the small things I had brushed off, the little inconsistencies that, in hindsight, seemed so glaring. Each one now felt like a breadcrumb leading to a place I didn't want to go, but knew I had to face. The first thing that stuck out was her scent. It wasn't a major change, but it was noticeable enough. She had started wearing a new perfume. I had never asked her about it. It wasn't like I thought it was suspicious. It was just different. But after that night, every time I caught a whiff of it on her hair or clothes, my mind would race. I tried to ignore it, but the more I thought about it, the more I realized it wasn't something I had ever noticed before. And then I remembered something else, her sudden interest in keeping her phone close. She would always put it face down on the table when we were together. It wasn't out of character for her to be on her phone, but before all this, she hadn't been so secretive about it. When I tried to glance at it, she'd quickly shield the screen with her hand or abruptly get up to answer a call. Looking back, I realized how often I had been distracted by work or life, how I had let these little things slip by unnoticed. It wasn't like Emma was a stranger to me. We had shared everything for years, our hopes, dreams, fears. But now, in this new light, I began to see how much of her I hadn't really known. But the real turning point came on Wednesdays. She had always been home by dinner, but for the last few months, something had changed. She had started coming home late, far later than usual, claiming it was because of extra rehearsals for work. She'd tell me the same thing each time. She had to stay longer, that there was something that needed her attention, some project that was behind schedule. I never thought twice about it. I trusted her. But now, as I looked back, I couldn't help but wonder if she was simply making excuses. That was when I started to keep track of the dates. It was a decision born of both suspicion and a strange desire for clarity. I pulled out my phone and marked down the days she came home late. Wednesday after Wednesday, she would be absent for hours, only to return with a smile and a kiss, acting as if nothing had changed. But I knew something had changed. I just couldn't place it until now. I started looking for patterns. As I pieced together the days she had been gone, I realized that many of them coincided with the times I had seen unfamiliar receipts tucked away in her bag. It wasn't just small purchases. It was a hotel receipt, dated from one of the nights she had been working late. I didn't think it was hers at first, but the more I stared at the receipt, the more it made sense. The name on the receipt wasn't a name I recognized, and the purchase was made in a town several miles away from her office. It didn't take much to put two and two together. That night, I tried to push my suspicions aside. I wanted to believe her, to hold on to the life we had before I even considered this possibility. But it was getting harder. The next day, I did something I hadn't done in years. I went through her things. I wasn't proud of it, but I was desperate. I started with her gym bag. It was a place she always kept a few items, her water bottle, a pair of sneakers, and sometimes a book or journal. But that day, when I opened the bag, I found a crumpled receipt that made my heart stop. It was from a hotel bar, the same hotel I had seen on the receipt before. The date was the same as one of her late Wednesday nights. The receipt was for drinks, not just a single drink, but a few of them, which made no sense. Emma wasn't a big drinker. If she went out for business, I could understand one drink, maybe two. But this. It didn't sit right. I couldn't stop myself. I had to know more. I searched through her calendar. And there it was, another pattern I hadn't noticed before. Small, seemingly insignificant marks had been made, marking days and times she'd be busy, without any explanation. These were different from the usual notes, like rehearsal or meeting. These were vague, no details, just a time and a block marked out. It was odd. I'd never paid attention to these before. I had never questioned her calendar. But now it felt like an attempt to cover something up. By this point, I couldn't ignore it any longer. It wasn't just about the shirt anymore. It wasn't just about the perfume or the phone. It was everything. The hotel receipts, the strange calendar entries, the unexplained late nights. It all pointed to one thing. There was something going on that Emma wasn't telling me. I started watching the security cameras around the house. Not because I didn't trust her, but because I had to know what was really happening when I wasn't around. I told myself I was being cautious, just checking to make sure everything was okay. But deep down, I knew what I was doing. I was looking for answers, searching for something to confirm what I had already feared. I expected the cameras to be clear, to show me nothing out of the ordinary, to reassure me that I was just overthinking everything. But what I found was far worse. The footage didn't show anyone entering the house at night, but the signs were there. A lipstick-stained napkin on the kitchen counter. A pair of unfamiliar shoes left near the back door. A smudge on the couch that wasn't there before. It was subtle, but it was there, like a trail of breadcrumbs that led to a place I didn't want to go. I started to realize something chilling. Emma wasn't defending herself. She was managing the attention. She had created this world, this illusion, where she could slip through the cracks and leave no trace behind. But every time I looked closer, every time I let myself see the pieces of this puzzle, it became harder and harder to deny what was happening. She wasn't just hiding things from me. She was actively keeping me in the dark, making sure I never connected the dots. The worst part was the way she reacted when I asked her about it. She didn't deny it outright, but she didn't confirm it either. Instead, she spun the conversation, made it about me, about my behavior, about my trust issues. She turned everything around, shifting the blame onto me. It was a tactic I recognized, a way of avoiding the truth by making me feel like I was the problem. I didn't want to believe it. I didn't want to accept the possibility that everything I thought I knew about our marriage might have been a lie. But the evidence was there, right in front of me, impossible to ignore. Every day it became clearer. Emma wasn't just changing. She was leading a double life, one that she had carefully constructed while I was oblivious to it all. I knew what I had to do, but part of me wasn't ready for it. The part of me that still loved her, the part of me that wanted to believe this was all just a misunderstanding, was still fighting against the truth. But the longer I let it go, the more I realized there was no escaping it. There was no going back. Emma had made her choice, and now I had to decide what to do about it. I kept asking myself the same question over and over again. How could I not have seen this sooner? How had I missed all the signs? It wasn't just about one piece of evidence. It was about everything. The scent, the late nights, the strange behavior. And as I stared at the camera footage again, I realized something important. I hadn't been blind. I just hadn't been paying attention. The days after I had connected the dots felt like an endless spiral of anxiety and doubt. I had done what I thought was the right thing. I had collected evidence. I had compiled a timeline. I had kept my suspicions at bay, gathering everything quietly, methodically. But none of it prepared me for the moment when everything I feared was laid bare in the cold light of reality. It was a Saturday afternoon when the final blow came. I had been out running errands, my mind still reeling from everything I had discovered, when I received a notification. It was an email from the cloud storage service Emma had set up for her work, something she had never mentioned to me before, but that I had noticed in the settings of her phone a few months ago. At first, I thought it might be a fluke, a random email, or some work-related content that was entirely innocent. I clicked it. It wasn't. What I saw in that email was enough to confirm what I had been avoiding for days. Emma wasn't just hiding things from me. She was actively betraying me. The video was from a hotel corridor. The footage was blurry at first, but I could make out enough. It was a small, cheap hotel in a part of town I didn't recognize. The timestamp on the video lined up with one of the Wednesday nights she had told me she was staying late at work. I clicked through a few more frames, each one sending a deeper chill through me. In one frame, Emma was walking down the hallway, her posture confident, a subtle but unmistakable smile playing at the corner of her mouth. It wasn't a smile of excitement or surprise. It was the smile of someone comfortable, someone who had done this before. She reached a door, and just before she entered, she glanced back over her shoulder, as though checking to see if anyone was watching. The door closed with a soft click, and the video cut off. That was when I saw the napkin. I had almost missed it, tucked away in the corner of the video, as Emma and her companion had entered the room. The napkin was discarded on the floor, but its logo stood out to me immediately. The same hotel logo, the same place from the video. In the blurry corner of the napkin, there was handwriting, a man's handwriting. The room number was hastily written in a rushed, almost careless manner. I stared at it for several minutes, my heart hammering in my chest. This wasn't some mistake or misunderstanding. This wasn't just a flirty conversation or some innocent after-hours meeting. This was intentional. This was Emma, knowing full well what she was doing and acting on it without a second thought. My mind raced, and I fought back the overwhelming urge to scream. I was already in the car when the realization hit me fully. This wasn't a one-time thing. This wasn't a random fling or some impulsive choice. This was part of her life, a regular part of her life. I had been living in the dark, unaware, trusting her without question, while she carried on as if nothing had changed. I drove in a haze. My hands were tight on the steering wheel, my breath shallow, my eyes fixed on the road ahead but seeing nothing at all. The images of the video played over and over in my mind. The smile, the door closing, the napkin with the room number. The writing on the napkin, now burned into my memory, felt like a slap in the face. This wasn't some emotional moment or accidental misstep. This was calculated. When I pulled into the driveway, I sat there for a moment, staring at the house. The place that once felt like home now felt alien to me, like a stranger's house. I didn't know what to do next. What could I even say to her? What could I ask her that would make sense, when the truth was already staring me in the face? I walked into the house with slow, deliberate steps. The door closed behind me with a finality that made my stomach lurch. Emma was in the kitchen, her back to me, humming softly as she chopped vegetables for dinner. The scene looked so normal, so mundane. It was as if nothing was wrong. But everything was wrong. I stood in the doorway, my mouth dry, my thoughts racing. I had imagined this moment countless times, rehearsed it in my mind. But now, with the undeniable proof in my hands, I didn't know how to start. How do you confront the person you thought you knew? How do you find the words to explain that your entire world has been turned upside down in a matter of seconds? Emma, I said, my voice quieter than I intended. She didn't turn around immediately, as if she hadn't heard me. Emma? I repeated, this time more forcefully, and she froze, her knife pausing midair. Slowly, she turned to face me, her expression unreadable. There was no guilt in her eyes, no shame, just a cool detachment, as though she had been expecting this all along. Yeah? She asked, the nonchalant tone in her voice making my blood run cold. Who was that man in the video? I asked, my voice barely above a whisper. The words came out smoother than I expected, despite the storm inside me. She blinked, a quick flash of surprise in her eyes, but it was gone just as quickly. What video? I could feel my jaw tighten, the anger rising within me. I didn't want to do this. I didn't want to stand here, confronting her like this. But I had no choice. "Don't play dumb, Emma," I said, taking a step toward her, the evidence still fresh in my mind. "I saw the video. I saw the hotel. I saw you with him. I saw the napkin with the room number. I saw the handwriting." Her face didn't change. If anything, she looked more tired than surprised. "Mark, you're overreacting," she said, her voice barely louder than a whisper. "It's not what you think. It's nothing." I felt the room close in around me. How could she say that? How could she pretend like this was nothing? The woman I had trusted, the woman I had spent years with, was standing here, trying to convince me that the video, this concrete proof of her betrayal, was nothing. "It's nothing," I repeated, my voice cracking despite my best efforts. "You're telling me that what I saw, what I know, is nothing?" "I made a mistake," she said softly, almost pleadingly, but there was no sincerity in her tone, no remorse. "But you need to understand, I didn't mean for it to happen. It was just a mistake." Couldn't breathe. The words felt like a slap in the face. A mistake? Was she serious? This wasn't some one-time lapse in judgment. This wasn't an accident. She had been sneaking around behind my back, living a double life, and now she was trying to reduce it to a mistake? "No," I said, my voice growing steadier despite the rage coursing through me. "This wasn't a mistake, Emma. This was a choice. Over and over again, it was a choice." She stepped back, looking at me as if she had no idea who I was. "Mark, please. I'm begging you to understand. I was lonely. I felt ignored. I needed someone." I shook my head, the tears welling up in my eyes, but I forced them back. "You needed someone?" I repeated. "Is that what this is? You couldn't come to me? You couldn't talk to me about it? You couldn't find a way to fix what was broken without destroying everything we had?" She opened her mouth to say something, but no words came. "I'm done," I said, the finality of the words hanging in the air between us. "I'm done with the lies. I'm done with the excuses. And I'm done with you." She stood there, her shoulders slumped, her eyes brimming with tears. But I didn't feel sympathy. I didn't feel anything but the sharp sting of betrayal. This wasn't a mistake. It wasn't something that could be fixed with apologies. The woman I had loved for years, the woman I had built a life with, was gone. And in her place was someone I no longer recognized. Someone who had lied, cheated, and destroyed everything for a fleeting moment of pleasure. The silence that followed was deafening, and as I turned and walked out of the room, I knew this was only the beginning. The days that followed the confrontation were the hardest of my life. I had said what needed to be said. I had laid everything bare. And yet, in some ways, the hardest part wasn't the confrontation itself. It wasn't hearing Emma admit, albeit in a half-hearted, defensive way, that she had been unfaithful. No, the hardest part was the silence that followed. She didn't apologize. She didn't beg for forgiveness. She didn't even try to justify her actions beyond weak, unconvincing excuses. Instead, she retreated into herself, as though hoping that if she didn't speak about it, the truth would somehow disappear. She spent her time in the guest room, coming down only to eat, or to avoid the awkward tension that had become our daily reality. It was as if she was silently hoping I would give in, that I would fall back into the routine we had before everything fell apart. I couldn't. I spent my days in the same house as her, but it felt like we were living in different worlds. The life we had built together felt like a distant memory, like something I had imagined in a different life. Every moment spent in the same room as her was suffocating, and it took everything in me not to break down. The woman I had trusted, the woman I had thought I knew, was someone else now. A stranger. I focused on the details. I didn't want to confront her again, not just yet. Not until I was certain. So instead, I started keeping track. I started documenting everything. The days she stayed late, the time she spent away from home, the excuses that no longer made sense. It wasn't just about the betrayal anymore. It was about protecting myself, making sure I had everything I needed to move on. The house felt like a war zone, and I was preparing for the battle. I started seeing a lawyer. The process was slow at first. I wasn't in a rush. I didn't want to rush into anything out of anger. But I needed to protect myself, and I needed to prepare for the reality of what was coming. Divorce, separation, the end of everything I had thought I knew. The lawyer was kind but professional, which I appreciated. He didn't offer any comforting words or empty promises. Instead, he asked the right questions, made sure I understood the implications of every decision, and assured me that no matter how difficult it was, I would come out on the other side stronger. He helped me organize the evidence I had quietly gathered, the hotel receipts, the timeline, the video footage. Each piece added to the growing weight of the truth that I could no longer ignore. Emma, for her part, seemed resigned to the silence as well. She no longer protested. She no longer tried to convince me that things would get better. She simply stayed out of my way, retreating into her world, while I built mine. She would ask me about trivial things, what I wanted for dinner, if I had any plans for the weekend, but it felt like we were speaking a language we no longer understood. The words felt hollow, like we were strangers making small talk in a room we could no longer share. The truth was, I didn't know what I wanted anymore. I didn't know what my life would look like without her, without the woman I had spent so many years with. But I knew one thing for sure. I wasn't going to stay in a relationship built on lies. I wasn't going to allow myself to be a participant in her deception any longer. I had given her the benefit of the doubt for too long, and now I had to make sure I didn't lose myself in the process. I kept myself busy. I threw myself into work, into projects I had put on hold for years. I reconnected with old friends, spending time with people who hadn't been a part of my life in a long time. I needed distractions. I needed to feel like I was still capable of living, of moving forward, even if the ground beneath me felt unstable. There were moments when I couldn't shake the feeling that I had somehow failed. Failed as a husband, failed as a partner, failed to see the cracks in our relationship before they turned into a chasm. I kept asking myself why I hadn't seen it sooner. Why had I ignored the signs? The little things that didn't quite add up? But then I would remind myself, I wasn't blind. I had just chosen not to see the truth. I had wanted to believe that everything was fine, that we were fine. I had wanted to believe in the life we had built together, even when everything around me had been slowly crumbling. And that was the hardest part. It wasn't the betrayal. It wasn't the lies. It was the fact that I had trusted her, that I had given her my heart, my life, my future, and she had shattered it without a second thought. Still, I held on. I didn't confront her again. Not yet. I didn't want to make a scene. I didn't want to let her see how much she had hurt me. I had already seen enough of her indifference. I didn't need to hear any more excuses, any more promises that things would get better. I wasn't going to let her control the narrative anymore. Instead, I kept my focus on the divorce proceedings. I made sure that everything was documented, that every step I took was in line with the legal process. There were times when I felt overwhelmed, like I was drowning in a sea of paperwork, in a sea of emotions I didn't know how to handle. But I kept moving forward. I had no other choice. Emma tried to engage with me from time to time. She would ask about trivial things, whether I wanted to watch a movie, if I was planning to go out that weekend, how my day had gone. She tried to act like everything was normal, like she could slip back into the life we had shared before. But I couldn't go back. I couldn't pretend like nothing had happened. I started to prepare my exit plan. It wasn't a rash decision, it was a necessity. I knew that I needed to get out of the house, to take a step back from the life I had shared with Emma. I needed space to breathe, to think, to start over. I packed my things quietly, methodically. I didn't want to make a scene, didn't want to drag this out any longer than I had to. I wanted to leave with dignity, with some semblance of peace. I wasn't going to argue with her. I wasn't going to beg for answers. I had already seen enough. The hardest part was knowing that this was it. This was the end of everything. The end of the life I had planned for. The end of the future I had envisioned. But it was also the beginning of something new. I took one last look at the house, at the life we had shared, and then I walked out the door. I didn't turn back. Couldn't. The silence in the house was deafening. There were no more arguments, no more tears, no more false hope. There was only the sound of my footsteps as I left behind the life I had once known. And as I drove away, I felt a strange sense of freedom. For the first time in weeks, I felt like I could breathe. The weight had been lifted, and for the first time in a long time I was free. Free from the lies. Free from the betrayal. Free from Emma. It was the hardest decision I had ever made, but it was the right one. And as the miles stretched out between me and the house I had once called home, I knew I was moving toward something better. Something real. Something that didn't involve the past, the pain, or the person I had once loved. The road ahead was uncertain. I didn't know what the future held. But for the first time in a long time, I was ready to face it. It felt surreal, in a way, to be in my own home while everything was falling apart. The routine had become almost robotic. I would get up, go through the motions of the day, try to act normal, but inside I was anything but normal. I was drowning in a sea of emotions, trying to stay afloat while watching the life I thought I had crumble before me. Emma, however, seemed to glide through her days with a strange sense of calm. It was almost as if nothing had changed. She would spend her evenings lounging in the living room, sipping wine, scrolling through her phone, watching TV, like she hadn't just destroyed everything. It was as though she was in denial, or worse. She believed that by acting like nothing had happened, she could somehow erase what she had done. I couldn't quite understand how she could be so composed, so confident in her own mind, while I was losing my mind. The disparity between our states of mind was jarring. She looked at me with an almost empty smile, as though expecting me to fall back into old habits. Asking her how her day was, making plans for the weekend, talking about nothing in particular. But I couldn't do it. I couldn't pretend like everything was fine. While she was unwinding with a glass of wine in hand, feeling like she had successfully compartmentalized everything, I was deep in the process of dismantling the life we had built together. The documents were ready. My lawyer had ensured that everything was in order, every piece of evidence accounted for. The divorce petition, the proof of infidelity, the timeline, everything I needed to begin my new life without her. I had made my decision. I wasn't going to confront her again, not in the emotional way I had before. There was no point. I had already seen everything I needed to see. I had already heard enough of her empty excuses. What I needed now was action, cold, calculated action. I remember the night I finished compiling everything. It was a Friday evening, the same night she was settling in on the couch, the same routine she had adopted over the past few weeks. She was watching some random TV show, her feet propped up on the coffee table. She seemed content, as if she hadn't just broken my heart. Meanwhile, I was sitting at the kitchen table, organizing the final pieces of my exit strategy. I had taken my time with this, meticulously making sure everything was in place before I made any moves. I didn't want this to be a chaotic breakup. I didn't want any drama or arguments. I didn't need closure from her. I had already closed that chapter on my own. This wasn't about winning or losing. It was about walking away with my dignity intact. The divorce papers were sitting in front of me, the legal jargon practically mocking me. The words were cold, but they were necessary. I had a stack of evidence, texts, emails, receipts, that made her infidelity indisputable. No more excuses, no more pretending. It was done. The reality was staring me in the face, and for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control of something again. It was tempting in that moment to just leave, to walk out and never look back, to make her feel the weight of her actions without a word. Just leave the house, go somewhere far away, and never speak to her again. But I couldn't bring myself to do it. Not yet. Instead, I stayed. I wanted her to feel the shift. I wanted her to know, without a doubt, that this was no longer about her or the life we had. This was about me taking back control of my life, of my future. I left the documents where she would find them. That night, while she was engrossed in the show, I made sure the folder with the divorce papers was placed neatly on the coffee table in front of her. I didn't say a word to her. I didn't offer any last-minute speeches. I didn't give her the satisfaction of a dramatic confrontation. I simply let her find it, let her read it, let her process it on her own time. As I walked past her, heading toward the door, she didn't even look up. I knew she was aware that something was different, but she didn't know yet how final it all was. I could feel the tension in the air between us, but I didn't want to drag it out. There was no need for more fighting, no need for more explanations. The decision had already been made. I gave her space. I allowed her to read through the papers without interruption. I wanted her to understand that I wasn't just giving up on us. I was moving on, and I wanted her to see the weight of that choice. I wasn't leaving because I didn't love her. I was leaving because love wasn't enough anymore. She had shown me that. The next morning I woke up early. I didn't want to be around when she processed everything. I didn't want to hear her sobs or her apologies. Not this time. I had heard enough of those already, and they didn't mean anything anymore. What was left to say? The truth had already been revealed. The choice had already been made. And for the first time, I was sure of my decision. I spent the day going over the final details of the separation, packing the rest of my things, organizing what I needed to take with me. It was almost mechanical the way I moved through the process. My emotions had become numb. I didn't have the energy for anger, for guilt, for the endless cycle of questioning that had consumed me for weeks. I had no more questions left. I had only answers, and the answers were simple. It was over. By the time Emma woke up, I was ready. I had already packed my things, already mentally prepared for the next step. I didn't wait for her to come to me. I wasn't going to stand around and wait for her to beg or offer a last-ditch attempt at salvaging what was left. I didn't want any part of it. She came into the kitchen while I was making coffee, her eyes still bleary from sleep. She looked at me, her expression guarded, as though she didn't know what to expect from me now. "Mark?" she asked, her voice uncertain. I didn't look up as I stirred the coffee. "The papers are on the table. You know what this is." There was a long pause, a silence that stretched between us like a chasm. She didn't say anything at first, just looked at me. Her lips parted as if she were going to speak, but nothing came out. "I'm leaving," I said, my voice steady. "I'm done, Emma. It's over." Her face softened for a moment, but she quickly hid it. She straightened, her body tense, and she gave a small nod, as if she understood but didn't want to admit it. I walked out of the kitchen, not looking back. There was nothing left for me in that house. Not anymore. I had done it. I had made my decision, and now I was walking away. No confrontation, no drama. Just a quiet exit, a final act of reclaiming my life. As I left the house, I felt a strange sense of relief. The weight of everything that had happened, everything I had carried for so long, began to lift from my shoulders. I was finally free. I didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in months, I felt like I was in control again. I had taken the first step toward rebuilding my life, and it was a step I was finally ready to take. This was the beginning of something new. I packed my things quietly, taking only what I needed. There was no scene, no confrontation, just the sound of my footsteps as I left the home Emma and I had built. I didn't look back. Blocking her contact wasn't out of vengeance. It was to preserve my peace. She didn't need more words from me, only the reality that I was done. The silence was the loudest part. It was final, an unspoken goodbye. Days passed, and I found peace in the simple things. A new apartment, routines without tension, and conversations that didn't feel like battles. I didn't rush into another relationship. Instead, I returned to myself. I discovered the freedom of being truly alone, something I hadn't realized I'd lost. The end of my marriage wasn't a loss. It was liberation. Emma had expected my blindness. I chose awareness, and from that moment on, I embraced my new life, free from the lies.